glad you're here. We are kicking off a new series today called LHC in Motion, and it's really around the idea of where are we heading as a church? Where are we going? Where are we going in this next season? It is a new season, literally, but it's also a new season here at Long Hill, and we believe God has given us a direction that we're going to go together. First of all, a bunch of you are wearing team jerseys, and this will be the ultimate test of unity, because I saw some Giants jerseys and some Eagles jerseys in the same room. I'm wearing a New York Yankees jersey, just so we can get through this. The word on the back of it is not fried, it is freed. Max Fried is probably the best starting pitcher on the Yankees. He pitched last night, and he beat the Boston Red Sox. Praise the Lord. So I'm asking you, if you're a Boston fan, or if you're a Met fan for that. If you're a Met fan, it's tough to be a Met fan right now. Sorry, Tatiana. I know it's hard. Suffering improves, it builds character. I know that. But it's just a sign that we are all together, and some of you are kicking off football. I'm still hanging on to baseball, and some of us are doing that as well. But we're kicking off a new season. One of my greatest fears in life is getting on the wrong train. I don't know if you've been in New York Penn Station, where they have, first of all, who built that thing? And you get down into the New Jersey Transit section of it, and there's all these tracks, and they're numbered, and it's kind of like waiting, I don't know, for the lottery to be announced or something like that. You're watching the sign, and there's the numbers, and then the track pops up all of a sudden, and everybody makes this mad dash to the platform. It's a good time. Some of you do that every day. God bless you. I don't know how you do that. But one of my greatest fears when I come back out of New York, through New York Penn Station, is getting on the wrong train. And so the number's announced, I go to the track, I try to make sure upstairs it's the right track. I go down and they have, where the train is headed on that LED display, and I make sure that that's right. And I get on the train, and I hope that the conductor who's announcing through a speaker that sounds like this, and you're going to long, it's who built that? Nobody has idea what that poor person is saying. And the train pulls out of the station, and I am praying and hoping that I'm not going to Long Branch. I'm going somewhere at least close to where I live. Even if I had to make it home by some other means, I could do it there. And like me, you in life, you want to be absolutely sure about where you're headed. We all want that. We want that personally. We want to see where our families, where our careers, where our relationships are going. And we want to do it really before we commit, before we put our feet across the threshold of the platform onto the train. And so anytime you do that, anytime you make one of those moves or one of those transitions, you want to be sure that you know where you're going. And so as we go into this next season as Long Hill Chapel, if you're getting aboard Long Hill, and by the way, one of the reasons we have name tags is because there's people who have been here for years, and there's people who just started coming last week, and it just helps us get to know each other. It helps us be the church and be the community. And if you go out there and your name tag's not on the board, if you ask one of our guest services folks, they will make sure next week you have a name tag that is yours, that is on that board. So just say, hey, I'd like a name tag, and we'll make sure that happens. The rest of you, do me the favor and just wear the name tags, even though you're like, I don't need to wear a name tag. Just do it, because it helps us know each other. But some of you are getting aboard Long Hill, and some of you are staying aboard. You've been here for some length of time. You've been through the ups and the downs and the twists and the turns, and it's a good time to ask the question, where are we going? And today, I want to answer a question, and it's the question of why. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is our why as a church? And I'm going to challenge you a little further to ask yourself the question in your life, with all of the things that you do, what is your why? Because unless that's absolutely clear, all sorts of other things begin to compete for our attention, for our affections. They begin to lead us in different directions. And it's not because they're bad things or because we mean for that to happen, but it's just because there's not that clarity of a lens through which to see all things. And so this is true for us as a church, but it's true in our lives as well. And that's what we're going to be looking at for the next few weeks. You saw some statements flash across the screen in the video bumper that happened before I came back up here. And these are the statements that we're going to be looking at as we've prayed, as we've journeyed, as we've reflected, as we've talked. We really believe that this is the direction that Jesus is taking us. And some of it is a little new, but a lot of it is built on the same pillars that have defined this church for generations. I think that God gives churches specific callings that transcend whoever happens to be leading or pastoring or anything else, and we're trying to rediscover that and return to that and define that as a church. Why does vision matter? Talking about the vision for our church, the why. Why does it matter? Because it brings clarity to everything. It brings clarity to the things we say yes to the things that we say no to. If you have a vision for your family and for your relationships, it defines your yeses, but it also defines your nos. If you have the same for your church, it does the same things. Where are we going to go? There's a reason that this matters so much. Just a few weeks ago, I went and I renewed my driver's license. I went to the Department of Motor Vehicle Services, and you have the appointments now, and when they started doing that in 2020, it was awesome because you could walk in and just go get the thing done and walk back out. We all said, how great is this? Well, it's back to lines that lead to other lines, that lead to desks, that lead back to lines, that lead to sitting in chairs, that lead to going back to desks, that lead to forms, and then other forms, and forms you didn't fill out correctly, and then back to lines, and then back to desks. And if you're lucky, after you pay enough money, you get to escape at the Department of Motor Vehicle Services. But there's something I think a lot of us do, those of us who renew driver's licenses. It's you look at the new one next to the old one, and you look at the picture. Ooh. Yeah, the pictures aren't great to begin with, right? But you look at the old one and the new one. This was the first time I looked at them and I said, ooh, what happened there? Some of you are asking the same question. What happened there? But it's one of those snapshots in the moment that demonstrates the passage of time. And as we get older, we're more and more aware of the passage of time. And it's this sobering reality that life is continually moving. When you're younger, you think you have all the time in the world. But as we begin to get older, we realize that both time and opportunities are limited, and it absolutely matters how we spend our time. It absolutely matters what we give our hearts to. It absolutely matters the commitments that we do make and decide not to make. And what happens along the way of that is we begin to ask the question, why? Why am I here? What's the legacy that's going to be left behind me? How should I spend these precious moments and these precious days? And I think what makes this even more challenging and complicated is the world around us tells us a lot of things so that we can numb that feeling, that inevitable march of time. We can medicate it, we can escape it, we can do any number of things to just not face down what it is. The culture around us tells us to stockpile, it tells us to consume, it tells us to chase after comfort, after status, after adventure, after stuff, even though in our hearts, secretly, quietly, we know that it won't last. And so there's these moments that we have, like the driver's license thing, but it's like when you attend a funeral, or when you encounter a pandemic like we did a few years ago, or when you turn on the news like we did this last week, and we hear the stories of the people, many of whom lived around here, of 9/11, and you see assassinations and murders and school shootings and all of these other things. It reminds us of how fragile life is. And we look past all of these other consumption kind of things, and we look into eternity as well. And so that's true for us, but the same is true for our church. Why are we here? What's going to define us? How are we going to be known? How are we going to be remembered? What are we going to leave behind us? And so we all long for more than that. You long for more than that. And today, I want us to begin to explore what that looks like as we look into the future, into the life, into the place, into the days, into the moments, into the gift that God has given us of the now, and balance that with the world that we find ourselves in. And it's no surprise that the Bible, that the scriptures speak to this too. And Pastor Joey's going to come and he's going to read a passage that when you hear it, you're going to be like, did he get the wrong passage? Did he turn to the wrong page? But it's the right page, and I'll explain why.
Romans 1:16 through 25. Hear the word of the Lord. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen.
And so you heard that. You heard the first part, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and everyone's like, yeah, that sounds great. Then we got to the second part, and you're like, what is going on here? What does that have to do with anything? Why is this so important? Because if we're going to battle against where our gaze would go, where we're tempted, where we're called, where we're encouraged to go, to just put our heads down and consume and escape and divide ourselves from others. If we're going to do that, we need to know the nature of the battle that we're in. We need to know what is actually at stake, the terrain that we're in. And if we don't, we will miss this. There's this passage in the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes, and like some of what you just heard, it's similarly depressing. It really starts out in chapter 1, and it says, everything, life under the sun is meaningless. Pursuits are meaningless. Wealth is meaningless. Status is meaningless. And it's just this massive buzzkill of a passage. But what the writer is getting at is this, that life without God, life that's not centered in God, is fleeting, and everything feels like vapor. All these things are temporary. They're fragile. They're elusive. And when we begin to bump into those moments where we see past the here and now, and we look into eternity, and we realize that our time is limited, there's this thing that happens in us. Maybe it happens in you. It definitely happens in me. We look, just as we sang, as we lamented this morning, there's this ache about the brokenness of the world. But at the same time, there's this look past it into eternity. And the writer in Ecclesiastes, he says, this ache is there because it actually points to something. It points to the fact that God has put eternity in your heart. He's put more than putting your nose down and making the next achievement and consuming the next thing and climbing the next rung on the ladder and just trying to get by and get what is yours. He's put more than that in your heart. And therefore, as people of God, if you are a follower of Jesus, you can live for more than that. Even when the world around us seems dark. even when it seems difficult, and even when the culture that would be around us would ask us to lower our gaze to that. Now, if we know that ache, if we know that tension, there's this thing that we tend to do instead. Back in that passage in Romans that Joey read in verse 21, it says this, for although they knew God, for although there was this thing, they neither glorified him as God nor they gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise. And we live in an area and in a place that claims to be wise. They became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. And some of you all are listening to that and saying, you know what I haven't done in my life? I've done a lot of things in my life, but I haven't exchanged anything for some snake pictures. I haven't done it. I don't have any snakes. I don't have pictures of snakes. You know, I might like birds. I might even watch birds, but I'm not like, yeah, birds are amazing. But what he's doing, what the writer, the Apostle Paul is doing, is he's saying there's this thing in the world, there's this pattern in the world that we exchange our view of God for something that is less than God. I grew up, and some of you are all like, here's another story of where Michael grew up and what Michael did when he was growing up. We had a whole menagerie of animals in our house. It was like a small zoo. And you know, when I would tell my friends how many animals we had in our house, we had a whole bunch. We had guinea pigs and hamsters and some rabbits. And at one point I did have like 10 snakes, not big snakes, little snakes, and some goldfish and a turtle and a frog and a toad. And what I would do is I'd go brag to my friends about the tonnage of animals that we had. It wasn't like I have this wonderful relationship with my cat. I was like, I had 10 fish and I had a turtle and I had 2 frogs and I had 10 snakes. And it was just like, it was like the 12 days of Christmas, but with like pets. And that was my life. One of the things we had and we constantly had is a lot of hamsters. There are hamsters everywhere. And so the hamsters would have more hamsters as hamsters are wont to do. And so we had this whole room dedicated to the zoo that was my growing up as a kid. There's this thing that hamsters do. If you've ever had hamsters, you're going to know this. If you haven't, you're going to learn something about hamsters today. You get some seeds, and they have like a food dish in there, and you take the seeds and you fill up the food dish, and the first thing the hamster does is the hamster comes out, and hamsters have pouches. So it's like, their cheeks will bulge up. And what they do is, even though like the food dish is 10 inches away from their nest, they go and they stuff their pouches with as many seeds as they can possibly carry. And then this this bulging cheeked hamster goes the 10 inches back to its nest. It goes into the corner of the cage and it spews all of the seeds out of its mouth into the corner. And I'm like, bro, you're here, the food dish is here. No one is competing with you for the food dish. You can leave it there, it's fresher. You don't have to bulge your cheeks up. It's not in the corner of your nest anymore. But this is what animals do. You give them something and they consume, and they get as much as they can because they don't know what the future looks like. That's why the squirrels love burying things in your mulch beds at your house. You get it all nice and smooth and you go out and there's all these divots in it. It's because some squirrel has gotten some nuts and buried it and they can't remember where it is. And so next spring something grows up that the squirrel forgot about. But that's what animals do. I believe the Apostle Paul here, he's saying something. He's saying there's a way that God has called us to live. And there's the way everything else, and frankly everybody else lives. Which is to get as much as we can, consume it, run our 10 inches back to our nest, and spew it into the corner. And some of you are offended right now because I'm calling you hamsters. I really am not. I promise I'm not doing that. But don't you imagine you were made for more than that? Don't you imagine that you were made for more than consuming and getting and leveling up and doing it over and over again until you get to the end of your life? Church, don't you imagine that God made you for more than that? And the answer is yes, absolutely He did. And He didn't just make us for more than that. He made Long Hill Chapel for more than that. He made us for more than just coming in here and singing 3 songs and listening to me or whoever, and our kids hopefully don't leave the property, and rinsing and repeating week after week after week after week. He made us as a church. He made you as individuals. He made us as a community for so much more than that. And here's the gateway to that, though. This is why we miss this. You know what I said is what you want too. You want a life that leaves a legacy. You want a life that has an impact. And the reason that we miss it and that the world around us misses it, and we exchange this vision of God for being kind of dignified, affluent, fancy hamsters, is this: you need saving. You and I need to be saved. We can't pull ourselves out of this. And even when we try to, we find ourselves being pulled back into it. So what happens is our consuming, stockpiling tendencies, they go far beyond having like a couple too many beers or buying a new car a little bit too often. What happens is it goes from that to we begin to consume other people. And when we start to do that, we begin to consume ourselves, and you only need to look at the news cycle in the past 7 days to see the effects of that, to see how it happens. And we start consuming, and it leads to addiction. It leads to bitterness. We start consuming others. It leads to lust and anger and hatred. And there's a word for this pattern that is absolutely unpopular in the world, but sometimes it's unpopular in the church because we want to look at what other people are doing with it, but we don't want to look at our own hearts, and I don't want to look at my own heart, and we just want to kind of keep skating by, and that word is sin. That word is sin. It's falling short of the glory of God. It's missing the mark. It's missing this vision of God and looking down at the hamster vision of the world around us. So what do we do about this? More importantly, what does Jesus say about this? Rewind in that passage that Joey read, verse 16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. First to the Jew, first to the people who are close, but then to the Gentile, the people who in the age that the Apostle Paul was writing were not close. And so this is the thing. This is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone, regardless of where you are, regardless of where you've been, regardless of how you look at your life and say, you know, I've really missed it, and you carry the weight of that. Jesus came to set you free. He came to give you a life to live for more than those things, even if today is the day that that begins. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith. It's not by what you do. It's not by how high you climb. It's by where you put your hope. Because the righteous will live by faith. We as a church really believe this. We actually do. And to whatever extent you do too, because you keep coming here week after week, or maybe you got up this morning and you said, I'm going to try something because I think there's more to my life than what I've experienced. That's why you're here. You have lots of other options on a day like this, but you chose to come here. And it's not because my preaching is the power of God that brings salvation. It's not because our wonderful worship team, as great as they are, and as much as I'm blessed by them, and I know you're blessed by them, it's not because they bring the power of salvation. It's because God does. God does. He brings it to you. He brings it to me. And when we feel that ache, the eternity that's been placed in our hearts, when we're caught between the world around us and the pattern that's so easy to get into, this is the thing that comes and pulls us out, is the gospel. The gospel becomes our why. The message of Jesus to bring hope, regardless of circumstances, regardless of what's on the news, regardless of where we've been or where we're going. That is the thing that brings us purpose. That is the answer to our why, because it transforms lives now and forever. And so our church's vision, the statements we're going to measure ourselves by in the next season, they emerge from this: embracing the way of Jesus and the Word of God, living it out in our families. And I don't just mean like, your kids, your husband and your wife. Some of you face a future because you had someone and they passed on into eternity. Some of you long for this. You know what, friends? We are the new family of God. The reason we have name tags is because we are the new family of God, and we ought to get to know each other. The reason we worship together is because we are the new family of God. The reason I came back to this church 6 years ago is because I wanted my children to, and many of you have done the same, to grow up in the new family of God. And so all of us have a family. You are part of a family. You may feel like you came in here alone today. You may have come in and your family on this earth, your biological family is a complete mess. You may have come in and there's a relationship that is broken that reminds you in the gut punch it is every day. Friends, I want you to hear this. You have a family here. You have a group of people who is walking through life, who is figuring it out, but is doing it together and doing it through the power of Jesus. And I'm committed to this. I'm committed to this for as long as the Lord would have me here, and I know so many of you are as well. Because Jesus is the one who changes everything. But when we begin to do that, there's something else that we ought to do. We ought to not just stay in here. We ought to be called out to transform the world beyond our walls. Whether it's across the street in Madison, whether it's to the ends of the earth. What's interesting about Long Hill Chapel is these three pillars have defined this church since the beginning. When we do these things well, when we commit to these things, as we look back through our history all the way back to 1946 when this church got its start, when we have grasped and embraced these things, this is the time where the church is at its best. So you only have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of opportunity. What will you do with that? The most important things we do in life, they always come with a cost. But you know what? You're paying a price anyway for what it is that you're doing, so why not pay the right one? Don't just ask today, what does Long Hill Chapel want from me? Or even, what does God want from me? Ask yourself this question. And I want you to dwell on that this week. What is the why of my life? What's the reason I get up every day? We all have to do it. Sometimes our kids or our families or our work situation, we want to eat and live indoors. Sometimes it's loftier than that. But what is the real why of your life? In the season that you're in, maybe it's not the season you want to be in. Maybe you look back to a season in the past and you're like, I want to be back there. But God has given you now. What is the why of your life now? Some of you, as you embrace this question, I tell you this, you're never going to get the right answer unless Jesus is the beginning of the answer to that statement. Unless the gospel, unless being saved is the answer to that statement. This series is not about telling you what to do. It is inviting you into who God has called you to be. So as a church, we're trying to really clarify this again. We're starting with our why. But you hear statements like this, you hear me talk like this, you're like, that really defines every church. Every church ought to say something like that. When the pastor person gets up there, they should say something like that. You're like, great, I've checked the box. There's really nothing controversial about what I just said. But here's the controversial part. You and I need saving over and over and over again. When I wake up in the morning, I need the gospel, the power of God, the salvation for those who believe. When I put my head on the pillow, I need it as well. When I go through the events of my day, when I struggle and grapple with the same challenges and the same temptations in my life, I need saving over and over again. It's not just those people out there who do the thing that I don't like. It's this heart in here. And it's your heart as well. And this week, as we've already said, it's just such a reminder of how broken things are, but it's also a reminder of how broken we are. And one of the things that's been interesting for me as I observe kind of some of the responses to some of the events this week is it doesn't just show the brokenness that is the situations that have happened in the news. It shows our brokenness as well. It shows the way that we've lowered our gaze and we've worshiped at the altar of other gods. And they may not be images of fish, no snakes, no hamsters, but they're things that represent that in our lives. And friends, you need saving from those things, and so do I. But the power of Jesus is that he reaches down and he offers you his hand. And he says, child, arise. May your vision be raised to something greater than the way you've walked before. And so, giving yourselves to a different vision of the life that God has for you, giving our church to a greater vision than just coming in and consuming religious goods and services, but being called into the family of God, being shaped and transformed by the way of Jesus and by the Word of God, and then going out these doors, not just to kind of have a little bit of impact on the world, but to see things change. To see the gospel lived out, proclaimed and lived out in our actions and what we do. If we do those things, friends, I promise you that you won't have a life that is just down here. You won't have a hamster life. You'll have something that's so much greater, and it's worth it. In the time that we each have, it's worth it. But if we know our why, all the other things, the how do we do this? The what, they begin to fall into place. That's true for you, but it's also true for Long Hill. Life is short. Your days matter. They are a gift from God. How we spend them matters. And eternity hangs in the balance quite literally. Friends, do not play small with the life that God has given you. You'll be tempted to. It'll be easier to. It will seem like it does, but it will lead you to an end that isn't worth it. Do not play small. In church, Long Hill Chapel, let's not play small. It's a scary world out there. It seems like it's a dark world out there, but we have been given the light of the world, who is Jesus, who's come to save you and me, and who keeps saving us. And together, we can step into this as a church in motion. Would you pray with me? God, we thank you that you didn't just come to have us rinse and repeat, to do over and over again the same things. You have placed eternity in our hearts, but you've given us, through the power of Jesus, the ability to walk in a way that has eternity in mind. I pray for those who maybe this is the first time they've considered that it's not just a religious obligation that they come here for on Sunday, but it's really to be a transforming encounter. Would you encounter them today with your saving presence? Would they find someone to walk through that door together with? May salvation be found in this house today. And for me, I'll speak for myself. I need saving again and again. But you are faithful And may you reach your hand to us all. Lift our eyes to heaven and show us our why. Pray in Jesus' name.